Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today we're using Teams, as you noticed, just to see if this works better. We did a test now a minute ago, and it worked pretty well. So I'm hopeful that this time the audio will be good and the screen will be good as well. So for today's meeting, I have one demo that I would like to show, which is called asynchronous activities. I don't know if anybody else has a meeting. I know Frans, last meeting you demoed UI-driven workflows, workflow-driven UIs, I should say. And you mentioned maybe you wanted to do an updated demo.
Yeah, I can do a demo on that one because the last time the recording wasn't that brilliant. So I can do that, and I can show you some new aspects in that as well.
Great, and your audio is perfect, by the way. So that's very good.
Well, that was 20 euros well spent on a new microphone then.
Just 20 euros?
Yeah.
I've spent much more, too much, and it didn't work out. So there you have it. Money isn't everything. Okay, so we will have workflow for UI. Does anyone have any topics they would like to discuss? I want to talk about example 2.9.x. All right. If something comes to mind, yeah, just add it.
I wanted to present this GitHub code spaces, but I really don't know because I'm from the iPad. I really don't know if it will work or not. Maybe we can give it a try at the end. Otherwise, we'll do it next time.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. All right. Awesome. So, Frans, would you like to start, or do you prefer that I start with the asynchronous activities?
No, if you can start, and I'll set everything up on my computer. So.
Sure. Got it. I was loading in the Elsa 3 solution here. I also need to open the designer solution right there. All right. So while this is starting, just a bit of context of what I'm about to show. I think a couple of meetings ago, we talked about job activities or jobs in general, which are, background tasks that run in the background and could be started from a workflow. And to make it simpler, I added a activity provider, which could take defined jobs that are written in C#. So they are written as C# classes. And they would then automatically become available as activities for the user to add to their workflow. And as a demo, I created a sample job, not an activity, but a job called index blockchain. And I will show you just as a reminder. I don't know why the workflow definition browser doesn't work all of a sudden. It worked, of course, a few minutes ago, but that's what you get when you try to demo something. Did somebody want to add? Sorry, did somebody get added?
Yes, just Mohammed. He disconnect and reconnect. So I added.
Okay, good. So yeah, I don't know why this is broken, but it doesn't matter for now. But just to show you the sample job. So this is a job, and I will show you how it's implemented. So here's just a reference .NET Core server. Oh, look at this, what's happening here. Database disk image mouthful. Alrighty, so let me just stop this for a second and delete this database. Right, so just to show you what a job could look like in Elsa using Elsa's APIs. Doesn't have to be an Elsa job, right? Could also be a Hangfire job, doesn't matter. But Elsa comes with a job runner out of the box that operates or runs jobs in memory. So it's not like Hangfire where you have persistent jobs. Not yet, at least. Maybe we'll have that as a feature later on. But for now, it's just something to get going with jobs. And to implement a job, you create a class that derives from job and then implement the execute async method. And that's it. And this is not an activity. So you could have custom code. Let's say you have an ASP.NET controller and you want to kick off a background job to process some work. Maybe you want to index the blockchain. It says this demonstrates or process some videos or whatever, doesn't matter. The point being, you have some long-running work to do and you don't want to block the UI or other processes like workflows. You just want to kick off the job, and once it's done, you want to be notified about that. So in this case, the workflow needs to be notified about a finished job so that the workflow can continue. That's a typical use case. To make this simpler, instead of you having to create a custom activity that then kicks off a background job, we can automate this. So this automation looks like, well, comes in the form of an activity type provider, which we have in this module called elsa.jobs.activities. It has a job activity provider. And what is an activity provider? It provides activity types to the system. And in this case, it's doing it based on available jobs that are registered with the system. The default activity provider provides activities to the system by reflecting on classes that implement iActivity. So you can imagine different kinds of providers, and they all work together in the sense that they all contribute to the total set of activities that you would see in the toolbox here. So that as a little background of activity providers, it works the same in Elsa too. So this one takes the job registry. So that's like a little dictionary containing the available job types that we have in the system. And then this provider instantiates activity descriptors. And as part of this descriptor, we have a constructor that takes care of instantiating the activity to execute. So here I'm using a job activity. And the job activity it's a general purpose job activity that that you configure with a job type to instantiate and execute or schedule actually. So here, as you can see, I'm creating a job using a factory. Then I submit the job to a job queue and then create a bookmark that will be resumed once the job finishes its job. Now, this is a job activity itself that should not be browsable, which it isn't, because in Elsa 3, you have to explicitly register the activity types that you want to be displayed in the UIs. But because I didn't do that, you don't see this job activity in the toolbox here. But in theory, you could do it, and then it would appear here as a job activity, which you then have to manually configure with the job type. But because I'm using the activity type provider, all of the classes that implement job will appear here as an activity. So the way this works is I add it here, like so. Yeah, and then what will happen here is, excuse me, my throat is a little bit dry. So yeah, sorry about that. So the write line will execute first, then this will execute. It will schedule and queue the job, execute in the background. While that happens, this workflow instance will be suspended. So it will be will go out of memory, and then it will resume the workflow once the job finishes, and then end with the final line here. So I've already demoed this. Then Mohammed gave the feedback or asked the question of, what's the difference between a job? And we talked about that as well. So what's the difference between a job and an activity? So the key difference, of course, is that a job executes in the background while the workflow can be suspended if this is the only stuff to do for the workflow. Of course, if we branch out to other branches that are performing work, then the workflow will not be suspended yet. It will only get suspended once there's no more work to be done and there's a blocking activity, or there are bookmarks added to the system. And then, but an activity executes in the foreground, so to say. So a write line executes in the foreground. This one as well, it's also a write line. This one executes in the background. So that's the key difference. And what you could do is create an activity that schedules or enqueues a job, and then the activity would suspend the workflow or create a bookmark. What I want to show is the ability to implement activities, custom activities that can execute in the background or asynchronously, if you will. And for that, I created another demo activity called process video. And I will show the implementation right now. So as you can see, this is a class derives from activity, and it implements execute async. So it's very similar to a job, but if you would implement an activity like this, it will take, well, 7.5 seconds to finish, because what I have here, I have some number, the number 15. For each, well, from 0 to 15, I am waiting 500 milliseconds, so that's half a second, and then writing something out to the console, and then I ultimately finish. So this will take, say, 7.5 seconds. This means that if I were to execute this as is, the workflow activity, this activity would take 7.5 seconds. And that would also mean that, let's say I am going to, let's delete this for a second and add this one. The workflow would be executing 7.5 seconds, as I mentioned. And if I add another one and I create a fork like this, then in Elsa 2 and currently in Elsa 3, this workflow in total will take 15 seconds to complete, because this is not a true parallel fork. The way this works, it's sequential. So it's first gonna execute this one, and then the second one, or the other way around, depending on the order in which you created these connections. But it's not truly parallel, and that's a limitation of the Elsa 2 engine. And before the PR that I created today, it was a limitation in this system as well. But to work around that, you could create a job, and now you can also create activities. And the key will be to specify the kind of the activity. So what we have here is we have an activity attribute, which allows you to provide information like the namespace to uniquely identify this activity, to avoid name collisions, basically. A category, which is used in the activity picker. A description, which is also used in the activity picker. And a kind. And we have a bunch of them. So we have the default one is an action. So that's like write line, send email. Out of the box, they are now actions. And so they are activities that run in the foreground. We have triggers, which are activities like HTTP endpoint, message received, or timer. That's those kind of activities. And then we have job, and a job will execute in the background always. And then we have task, and a task could be a job or it could be an action. And this depends on what the user configures. So what I used here is I configured this activity as a task. So this allows the user to go select this task tab and then execute asynchronously. So the difference will be, so these are not configured as asynchronously. So if I run this workflow now, so let's just try it out. I don't think something's working well because I didn't see an identifier. So did I not start? Oh, I forgot to start the backend. That's typical. By the way, if I'm going too fast or there's any questions, just feel free to interrupt. All right, let me reconstruct that workflow real quick. So we have this one and two of these. Let me just start with this first, just to show the basic flow. We'll publish this, copy the definition ID so that we can kick off an execution using Postman. First, I'm making sure that I have a valid bearer token by generating one using the identity endpoint. Then I can use the access token that was returned in the execute endpoint of a workflow definition. So now, as you can see, it takes a long time. And if we go to the console, we see that it's running that long, well, that this heavy activity in the foreground. So only after it was done executing, we would return receive a response from the server. And now I'm gonna change this to run in, to execute asynchronously. So in other words, in the background. So we'll publish this again. And this time when I do a new execution, we will get an instance ID immediately. In the meantime, that activity executes in the background. And at this point, the workflow instance is suspended. And only after the job finished will workflow execution resume. And this enables us to do things like, well, it achieves close to true parallelism. And I'm saying close because it's still not entirely parallel, because these branches still execute sequentially, one after the other. But because these activities execute in the background, they get basically enqueued into as a job, both of them, and that's a quick operation. So they both execute quickly. The scheduling, I should say, so the activity itself executes quickly. Sorry, that's incorrect. They get scheduled quickly, and then the activity itself executes in the background in parallel, because they are now both configured to execute asynchronously. So when I publish this and do another execution, you see this is finished again quickly. And now they are both executing at the same time. And that's, of course, in contrast when we cannot execute them asynchronously, or when we disable that, then we'll have to wait for one and then the other. Just to show you. Of course, this will now take 15 seconds. And here, it will also take, well, this is the first activity that's done, and then the second one. So that's the new feature that came in today. I'm very pleased with it, because this solves a lot of issues I've seen in the past with certain workflows with Elsa 2, and with this capability, those are no longer issues.
Question?
Sure.
To be sure that I understand well, the last write line will wait for the two process video, even if they are asynchronous?
Shipka, if you're talking, you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Thanks, Christina. So I was saying, that's right. That's a good question. So let's update write line to write end, and this one start. And these are asynchronous again. Let's see that indeed this one executes lastly, even though these execute asynchronously, because that's the nice thing about this setup. The workflow orchestration is still synchronous, and as you can see, it writes end just once.
Okay, and the fact that when you start the workflow using the API is because it's the same behavior as the HTTP receive. So when the workflow go to suspend state, the HTTP receive send a response.
That's right.
Okay.
So indeed, whenever I invoke this API endpoint, it will I'm not sure if it's going to do. Yeah, it's invoking it synchronously because it's execute. So that we have dispatch. Dispatch will always return immediately, even if you don't use background running activities, right? Because we are sending a message to a queue, and then the consumer of that message will execute the workflow. So this already happens in the background, but the workflow itself will still take, let's say, 15 seconds if you don't run those activities in the background. But execute will run the workflow from start until it gets either suspended or when it finishes. But yes, because those two activities are scheduled to execute in the background, it will return a result quickly, at least the instance that it will be returned. And if you were to inspect the status of this instance, it would still be set to running or executing.
Okay. Last time we also revisited the join and the option there to have an explicit join and indicate that there was a cancellation on the execution of the branches. I would like to revisit that at one point because I find it a bit confusing, but thinking of that, would then, if we had an explicit join there and one of them, maybe there are some other steps as well, just arrive first, will that immediately send out a cancellation token for the background ones and then try to stop them? Or is that not something that is implemented?
That's a very good remark. That is not implemented. And to get back to the first point, one idea that I have to control what happens to the previous activities will be to explicitly configure what the behavior you want, because in many scenarios, you may just want to cancel whatever trigger is here. Like if you have this classical case where, let's say, you have a timer that waits for some time, let's say a day or 5 minutes, doesn't matter. And in the other branch, you have a different trigger where you wait for some user input. And in most of those scenarios, you want to cancel the other timer. So instead of doing something like that explicitly using, let's say, an explicit action that then cancels some timer or cancels the other event, or maybe there's another construct from a process modeling point of view. It seems very convenient to me that it will automatically cancel if this were a timer and this were a user event that you're waiting for, to just cancel it. But maybe in other cases you do want to do some additional stuff, as you pointed out during one of the last meetings. So you want some control. So, and what the default should be, I don't know, but maybe on the flow join you should have in the settings have another mode, like a cleanup mode or some property that allows you to control this behavior. In this way, users can choose what they prefer. If they prefer to do it explicitly, they can. And if they prefer to have the same behavior that we have in ELSA 2 today, they can use that as well. So that's one.
Yeah. That sounds interesting, because I was looking to the BPMN notation for that, because I think in the BPMN notation they have something like events that you can point on an activity in the workflow, like cancellation event or cancellation trigger. And basically, if you put those on the join and the ones that you want to cancel, and by naming convention or ID, just have an indication which should be cancelled, then you're in full control of that.
Yeah, that sounds nice to have explicit control to cancel some trigger.
Yeah.
So I would like to if you want, if you can, maybe you can show it to us how this works in BPMN at some point for inspiration, because then we can learn from that and use it. So so I like having that option as well.
Yeah, we'll do that.
All right, but for now, for the second part of your question, whenever this join happens, it's not going to cancel this. So what the join will do is it will clean any bookmarks, but it has no awareness of ongoing jobs in the background. So this is a good topic to consider and talk about. What should happen? Should we have some control using either explicit activities and or a setting on the flow join to control what happens? Should it, right now it will delete bookmarks, but it will not cancel ongoing jobs. But we could implement it by some mechanism to cancel jobs. I think in most cases, when you launch 2 background jobs, the general expectation, at least this is my assumption, is that you always want to wait for the jobs to complete, and once they complete, you continue the flowchart. But maybe there are scenarios where you do want to cancel a job.
Yeah, I think they are. I'm not aware of some specifics now, but yeah.
Yeah, probably it is something that maybe we need to define for a background job. What will be the canceling behavior? So if, for example, we are executing some long-running database job, so probably it has to be rolled back or something. But if we are copying files, so maybe it is fine that we just interrupt in between. So maybe it is something that we need to define in the job level. What could be the canceling behavior?
I'm hearing some background noise, which is a little bit distracting. Not sure who that is, but if you have a mic against your beard or something, maybe move it a little bit further. So Mohammed, if I understand correctly, you're suggesting to have some behavior on a given job to control when it should be canceled. I'm not sure I understood that that suggestion. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Okay, I'm not sure if the audio is coming from my side. Am I clearly audible?
No, it's okay.
There was,
yeah, it was
I heard.
but,
it was a bit short, very short bit. There was some noise, but sounds okay now.
Yeah. So my suggestion is that we can define some behavior on the background job itself to define what happens when it gets canceled, whether it needs to roll back some actions or just stop where it is. For example, if my running job is a database action, probably maybe I need to roll it back. But if it's just a simple file copy or just some long running process, that it is okay to interrupt in between. So it doesn't have to do anything. So in that case, we can put the safeguards in the job itself to define what would happen if it gets canceled for any reason.
Yeah, in the
yes,
BPMN,
so that's one step ahead, right?
Yeah,
that's one step ahead of
sorry.
invoking a cancellation. Sorry, Frans, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, me neither. So no, but in BPMN there is something like an event that you can put on an activity as well that is compensation, which basically says whenever something fails, in that case the compensation needs to be taken or needs to be activated, and from there on you can define what needs to be activated to do, for instance, a rollback on a transaction or a database and so on.
So that's for failure or false. Is there also something for cancellation? So as Mohammed suggested, let's say indeed we want to cancel using some activity, some job, and then the job should either have built-in logic to undo what it did. Is there something for that in BPMN, handling cancellations and not just faults?
I don't know it by heart, but I will look into that and see what kind of strategies they have, at least for the notation, to link things together in case of cancellation or failures.
Great. Yeah, that would be nice. All right.
Just to add about this this feature, I think it could be also awesome to as the demo with the dispatcher to be able to choose where we want to process the background task.
By where? What do you mean?
On which resources we want to execute the background. So a specific node that has a compute unit, etc.
Oh, yeah, that ties in nicely to the topic you've been working on.
Yes.
To control and the demo you did the last time.
Yes, and it's really makes sense with a background task.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have to work on my side to be able to give you some other input and try to make this on the V3.
Yeah, I got your work cut out. I got your work cut out for you.
Okay.
Nice. All right. So what do you guys think about this thing that I did? Because I'm not entirely sure. I think on the one hand, it's nice. On the other hand, it could be a little bit unintuitive or confusing because from first looks, what's the difference between an action and a task? Another implementation could have been to just say, well, maybe an activity could be an action and a job. So instead of using these exclusive values, maybe they could be XORed together so that something can be an action and a job and a trigger. And then we don't need task. That's something I'm still considering of maybe changing. But if you have any thoughts on that, I would love to hear it.
Not straight away.
Yeah, if you have a thought right now, even better. But it's also fine if you want to think about it and maybe come back to it later.
Yeah, I need some time to process this and see the pros and cons for this.
Yeah, for sure. That's fair. Yeah, so this is all I have for this particular piece. Let me see if I forgot something in terms of the implementation. Oh, there's one thing that hasn't been done yet, and that's the following. This takes me to the implementation of this background execution of activities. So just to show you, the workflow core library has a middleware component to execute activities. And currently it has two middleware components. One just begins or creates some log entry before it starts to execute the next middleware component, which happens here, and then it also uses some stopwatch, and then write something to the log output. But the real deal is this one, the default activity invoker middleware. Now, this is responsible for actually evaluating the inputs of an activity, then executing the activity, and then copying the bookmarks created by an activity into the workflow execution context. This is synchronous execution, but I want to show you how the asynchronous execution was implemented. Now, the workflow core library doesn't have any notion of jobs. I want to keep the core library as lean as possible, because this could also be used in other environments where you don't need asynchronous processing or background processing like jobs. So what I did instead, I created another implementation of an activity execution middleware component in the jobs activities library. And this middleware, it inherits from the default one, but it overrides the execute activity async method. And what it's doing here, it's going to look at the activity kind of the activity about to execute. And I'm checking a couple more things. But basically, if it determines that the activity should be executed in the background, then it's not calling into the base implementation, but instead it's going to create a job and then schedule that or submit that job to the queue. And this job will then actually execute the activity that it's that is part of the job being created here. So here I instantiate a job, assign it some properties like the activity to execute, and some details for the job to be able to resume the workflow once the activity finished execution or the job finished execution. But what's still a potential issue, or it will be an issue for sure under certain circumstances, is the fact that, well, it's a timing issue. And we have it in Elsa 2 as well, and we have a solution in Elsa 2, and Jay knows more about this, which has to do with the creation of the bookmark and submission of the job. So imagine I submit a job to the queue, and this job finishes before the created bookmark was given a chance to be registered in the global bookmark registry, which is an important component in the Elsa engine, because this is how resuming workflows work. So if, let's say, a timer triggers or a job finishes or a message gets received, then those handlers will resume associated workflows or trigger new workflows by looking up bookmarks being registered. But if the bookmark isn't there and the job finishes before that bookmark exists, there's no workflow to be resumed. And you can imagine that if the job indeed finishes beforehand, later on the bookmark gets created, it will never be resumed, this workflow, so it will be stuck forever. And this is a problem. And this can be easily created, this problematic scenario, by creating a fork workflow, where in one branch you start some work, and in the other branch you perform a heavy operation in the foreground. And if that branch executes first, then the other branch will not have a chance to execute, or even worse, if that one executed and scheduled the job, and then the other branch executes immediately after and then taking a long time, the workflow will not enter the suspended state, and because at that point, that's when the bookmarks get stored in the database. So it's a big timing concern. So this is something I still need to fix. And one idea I have is to take a similar approach as we do in Elsa 2, where basically what we do, instead of doing this work of submitting the job to a queue right here in this stage, we would do it after a workflow gets suspended. So only at that point will we actually schedule the job, so that we can be sure that bookmarks have been saved in the registry, and then it's safe to submit a job, because if it were to complete immediately, it's no problem because the bookmark would be there. So that's just one more puzzle to solve.
So you say that you enqueue the job only when the workflow suspend.
Well, yeah, when it suspends, indeed, because so it shouldn't happen as it executes, because there may be more activities to be run. And the reason I'm saying suspended is because the bookmark needs to be saved there. So if the bookmark were saved regardless of the workflow being suspended, then it doesn't matter. But right now, that's the moment at which bookmarks get persisted in the bookmark store, is when workflows get suspended. I think, now that you asked it, I'm thinking maybe that's not entirely true. Maybe these bookmarks get persisted regardless of the workflow being suspended. I need to double check. It depends on the queue containing the work for the workflow engine to process. And I think as long as it's processing, stuff is not being sent to the database. But yeah, I need to double check.
because the idea, maybe I'm wrong, but if you have two branches, one with a job and one with 100 synchronous tasks, the job can never execute.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's say we have here a process video that executes in the foreground. Let's say this is this could even be a loop doing this thing 100 times in the foreground. Yeah. And if this executes first, then this will never be well, it will be scheduled eventually, but only after this one finishes. That's right.
So we have to find a way to catch this.
Yeah, maybe. On the other hand, you can always put work in a job, right? So if you do something like that, then maybe you should put it in a job. Or maybe that we could have some sort of custom or some sort of activity that's like a container that whatever work is part of it, whatever activities are part of it, those will execute in the background. So we could make it easy for users, but for a developer, they should probably just implement it as a job in the first place or a task, and then the user can mark them to execute asynchronously. But if you run into those scenarios, then yeah, you need to make sure those activities execute asynchronously, because the ELSA engine itself will not schedule the activities themselves asynchronously. And we can try to solve that, but I think it's so complicated to actually schedule in parallel the activities, because then at some point, activity is complete, but because you have now multiple executions on different threads potentially, you need to somehow merge the state back into a single object, into a single state of the workflow. And then you can, if some process executed before the other one, and maybe they both updated a variable, but which version would you take if there's a merge conflict? I don't know. It's it seems very complicated to me.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, but maybe it's solvable. I don't know too much about it, but I think this combination is okay, because if you run into the scenario you just described, you always have at least an option to design your workflow a little bit differently by running that work in a background job, and then you won't have the issue. And I think that's more important, that we at least have a workaround or a solution, even if it's not ideal.
Yeah.
All right, Frans, do you want to show us your demo?
Yeah, that's fine. I will share my screen in that case, this one. So yeah, I demoed this before, so I prepared a little bit of a different story to tell, so people don't get bored, I hope. But basically, I'm going to talk about the user task and the interaction between an ELSA engine and the front end. And to understand how that works.
So last time you didn't have this icon, so I already like it better.
Well, then watch out for the next slide. So if it would go to that one, oh, that's fun. It doesn't. Oh, there it is. So, okay. So basically, this is the implementation that is a typical implementation for a UI that interacts with an ELSA engine. And basically, the ELSA engine already contains controllers, workflow instances, if they are activated already, bookmarks and triggers. And it's a bit about what we discussed in the previous topic. We need to understand what bookmarks are and what triggers are to understand how we can leverage that from the UI perspective. So a bookmark is basically a workflow instance that got suspended, like you used to do in an old school book, where you I folded the pages. I know people will frown upon that, but I folded the pages to know where I was, and basically that is the intent of the bookmarks, just to indicate from this point on it is suspended, the workflow instance, and I'm waiting on a certain signal to continue the execution of that. Triggers is a bit different. Basically, there is no workflow instance, but there is a signal that can activate and create a new workflow instance. And if we look at the perspective of this, we start off with a simple bookmark, or not even a simple bookmark. We just use this, the default way in which an UI can trigger the execution of the workflow. And in this case, it's just having a blocking activity and sending a signal. And that signal basically tells the workflow to continue. It doesn't yield much for the UI, other than being able to control when a workflow continues. So it's more about controlling the workflow than having an interaction in the UI based upon the workflow instance. And in order to do that, we need to have something inside of a workflow definition that indicates this is something that the UI needs to act upon. And for the implementation that I did, and I wrote a series of documents about that on Medium, I implemented a user task. And the user task is basically a simple activity that holds some metadata about the step that the user needs to perform, and it puts it in a suspended mode, waiting for a signal that that the user did what he was asked to do, and perhaps add some data regarding the execution of that user task into the workflow, so the workflow can act upon that. So for the implementation, I created an user task activity and an additional controller. And this additional controller allows me to interact with the engine to determine which workflow instances are actually waiting for a user task, and maybe send a signal for a specific workflow instance to continue. And those aren't in the default controller that Elsa provides, and you can extend Elsa easily with your own controller to provide that functionality in the Elsa engine. And how it works is then that the UI will send a signal to the user task signal controller, and this controller can look at, okay, which bookmarks are there that are actually waiting on the type of a user task, and which workflow instances are triggered for that, or can be triggered from that. And this gives the opportunity to get a list back of all the tasks that a user might perform given the workflow instances that are activated. So basically, this is the overview page of a to-do list. And you can use filters to see which specific tasks there are, so you can have different lists in the UI indicating what needs to be done. The triggers basically tells the UI what kind of user task can be activated, and basically what information it needs and which signal to send back to the engine to activate a new workflow instance. So you could have a form, for instance, indicating the initial data that is needed to start a workflow instance. Filling in the form will not having the effect that the workflow instance is already created. It will create it once the signal is sent, including the data. And at last, the last option is, okay, but how can the UI then interact from the engine without having all the time querying and bombarding the user task signal controller to see what the state of each workflow instance is to leverage on the signal-R implementation that is already implemented in the ELSA engine, which basically can send signals back, and you can subscribe to these signals or events to indicate, okay, something happened on an workflow instance. And the way I implemented this is when I go to a specific detail page from the overview that I created from the bookmarks, I get the specific details of that workflow instance. I subscribe to the signals that are related to that specific workflow instance ID. So I don't listen to all the events. I just say whenever something happens for a workflow instance that I'm currently looking at by this ID, please notify me. And signal-R provides that functionality that you can subscribe to a group, and the group is then for each workflow instance that is running. And whenever something is popping up in that group, some conversation in the signal-R, the UI can leverage on that and activate a screen. So let's look at how that is implemented. So we have several scenarios. Basically, this is the simple add task. I didn't do anything, no implementation here, but whenever I press this button, it will create a workflow instance. Here we have the instance ID. And when I press this one, basically all I do is send a signal back, no payload, indicating continue. And then it magically disappears. And when we look at the engine, where are we? There. We will see that the workflow instance now here is finished. And basically we have the signal received. That was the starting point. We have a user task. That was the button that I clicked. And we had a write line, and that finished it off. If I look at this one, this is basically this overview page of the to-do list. And when I start a workflow, the signal was sent back to, let me go to this one. So we send a signal and we query afterwards where is a bookmark and which workflow instances are now open. So if we would look at the workflow instances, it would say that one is suspended. So for each one that I activate, I have several now, like this one, and I refresh the page. For each of them, a new one will be added, and I can send that signal. We go further, and we can go into an automatic mode, and this is not using signal-R. This UI responds to the signal and knows which what type of form to show for this signal. So it asks about some details. And if I continue, I run in trouble with timing. And this is because I sent the signal and I immediately request the status of this workflow. And we talked about timing issues in the previous topic as well. The engine didn't fully execute this activity yet. So it says it's still on the user task that you were on, and it shows again. But if I would refresh the page, then the engine has executed. It's now on the next user task, and now I see that results for that particular page. So this is one of the reasons that you would like to have that signal R in place, because then you just, whenever you send a signal, you remove the form and you wait for the signal to indicate now you have to show a new form. And if we look at how that would work, basically the same form. If I press continue, then we see the execution of the engine in the background. Basically, these are some timer jobs. And now it automatically shows the workflow user task for this particular step. If I finish that one, it will end the workflow eventually. If we look at these samples, the user task sample 6, let me go first to the engine. It will show you that we have now a couple of workflows. Some are finished. I will remove everything and delete them. So we have nothing here in the as instance running, but still, if I go to this one, I can have this screen where I can fill in some details, but at this point, if I refresh, I still don't have a workflow instance. So it knows about the signal input that is needed, because the workflow starts with the user task and the trigger tells me, okay, this one, this workflow definition blueprint starts with the user task. It requires this data. Please send a signal with that data to start a workflow instance. And that's what is happening when I press this one. After that, the execution is pretty much the same, but I don't have to send that initial starting signal to activate that workflow instance. And if I look at the engine now, and I refresh it, now I will have a new workflow instance, and it's in suspended mode because we arrived at the second user task. Then finally, in the sample that I made, we can see here these 4 menu options, 5 if you count in home. But you can make it really dynamic, and that the engine is really driving the UI. And I will show you that by going to this workflow definitions. I don't have any. I will create a workflow. Import one. And maybe someone has a random word in mind that we can use in the demo. Let's see. Anyone, any suggestions? Nickname. Okay, let's put here name, nickname, label text, nickname. Let's put some, and let's, what's the date? Let's put it like so. Something that we can recognize that it is actually working on that one. We save it, publish it. And by publishing it, it will show that there is a new trigger here, because it starts with the user task. And if we go to the UI and we refresh this one, we see that this start dynamic menu item is now added. If I click that one, we see that the form is created here, that we have the ability to put in some details. We continue. We have an other layout, and activating, it will save and it will end the workflow. And if I look at the execution of this one, refresh it. So we have this dynamic screen. We go to the instances and we will see that in the journal, all the data that was put in is actually as the payload of the signal added to the journal, and you can act upon that. So let's drag this one in. The whole way this was implemented is described in this series of documents about how to set up the documentation or the project, how to step-by-step implement everything. At this point, I'm writing an addition to it because I was implementing this in production, and I ran into some issues regarding the state of the engine versus the state of the user perspective, and how to overcome that. Using metadata on the workflow instance, you can have a good overview of the to-dos in a to-do list without having it always the need to be on a user task. The problem that I ran into was I could get the status from a user task, but because there were also some other steps in between user tasks, sometimes the to-do list was shortened because the engine was executing a non-user task at that moment, and that confused sometimes the users, saying, yeah, but I'm working on this this file, and sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not there. So I'm gonna create an additional blog post about that, how to overcome that using metadata on the workflow instance. So yeah, that was my demo for this. Any questions? Then thank you for listening in again. And let me explain my user task journey.
Well done. This looks awesome. And you mentioned the blog posts. We'll share the link to the blog post and the repo.
Yeah.
So people can check it out.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
Great. All right. Oh yeah, I have a question. When are you going to do this for Elsa 3?
Yeah, soon. If I get it up and running in production, then I will use this also as a test case for use for Elsa 3. That's a quite interesting one to see how that works. Next time even. Okay. Cool. I don't feel any pressure.
No pressure, but
no.
just you know, proper motivation.
Good.
Great. All right. Awesome. So as a final topic, we're a little bit over time. Are we done? Yeah, we're way over time. Yeah, just the state of 2.x. So I'm not sure who suggested it. I think maybe Mohammed, you suggested to do pre-releases on NuGet because we have MyGet and we deploy NuGet package to MyGet as soon as we push to the master branch, so that people who are depending on latest bug fixes and features, or just want to try out those features and fixes, they always have access to it. I use it a lot myself in customer projects, but there's also a lot of users who rely on the stable releases for good reason, because the MyGet releases, they can be volatile, they can contain sudden breaking changes, so it's not ideal to be testing all the time. But it's also not ideal to have to wait for an actual release on NuGet. Then people, upgrade the packets, and then boom, stuff gets broken, big surprises, and that's the problem there is if it's deemed to be a release, you would expect it to be stable and tested. But the project relies on many people testing out certain features and fixes over a certain course of time, because, well, me personally, I can't be testing every feature all the time. It's a little bit time consuming, so I rely a little bit on others to test as well. So the suggestion was to do pre-releases on NuGet, so that people will see, oh, okay, there's a new release candidate for a given version on NuGet. Let's try it out. So because it's a pre-release, there's still this little caveat that it may not work entirely properly yet, but it's about to be released. There's no major changes to be expected in that release candidate. So people can try it out, and if they see issues, of course, they can report. Hopefully they report those issues and we can fix them quickly. So this is a little change I added. So what is the state of 2.9? Let's take a look. So 2.9 is here available as a branch. There's 2 branches right now because there was a PR that introduced elsa-core 7 and .NET 7. But for me, I ran into issues because of, I don't know if it's because of the M2 chip, but I wasn't able to target .NET or the same project that uses .NET 5 and .NET 7 at the same time. I don't recall the details exactly, but there were some issues, and it has to do with the MS build being in 2 folders on my machine. So let me just show you what I'm talking about real quick. So here in Writer, there's Toolset and Build. Then I'm using currently the MS Build version here. So this is the .NET 6 SDK. So this is the latest one from this folder. So with this MS Build, I can target .NET 5 and .NET 6. But if I want to target .NET 7, I can change this path to not be of x64, but instead go up 1 level. Then here I have 6 and 7, but I don't have 5. So when I would switch to this MS Build version, which would be better for me because it wouldn't be x64, but it would be native to my Apple Silicon CPU. At least that's my understanding. But then I can't build the project anymore because it doesn't contain .NET 5 here. So I'm not so sure how to fix this. Although maybe one idea I have to just try is copy over the MS, the version 5 folders to this SDK folder here from the x64. Maybe it would be as simple as that. I don't know. In any case, for that reason, because I haven't figured it out yet, I created a 2.9x .NET 5 branch. So this does not include .NET 7 yet, because I imagine many people are still on .NET 5, at least I am. So yeah, so this contains the latest fixes of the 2.9.0 release, or 2.9.1 even, I think. And then we are about to release 2.9.2. Let's check here. Yeah, so 2.9.1 has been released. Still contains issues. So 2.9.2 is in the making.
Just about .NET 7 and .NET 5, do you know that .NET 7 is not a long-term support version?
That's
so,
right.
I don't know if we have some choice to do on this, but only .NET 6 and .NET 8 are LTS.
Yeah. So I don't think at least for me personally, I don't think it's the goal for everyone to skip Net 7 until Net 8. It should be up to anyone and everyone themselves to decide if they want to target that platform. But yeah, in my view, it's not like .NET 7 is not supported. It will be supported, and that's after for a while. I don't know for how long, but then at some point it's out of support. But it's not like it's never supported, right? Just supported for a shorter period of time.
Yes, it's not a preview. Just as they call a current, and it's supported for 18 months.
Right. Yeah. And I think upgrading to Net 7, eases the upgrade to Net 8 potentially.
Yeah, sure.
7 is not yet released. It's done in November. So this is a release preview also.
Mohammed, I didn't get the first part of your
yeah, .NET 7 is not yet released.
Oh yeah, right now it's not released. That's right.
Yeah, it will be released in November.
Yeah, in November. So actually, the latest master branch, without having .NET 7 installed, you cannot build it.
Yeah, exactly. So the master branch is broken because of that PR. So I think we should fix it. So somebody's making a lot of windy noise. Let's mute ourselves when we're not speaking. Thanks. So yeah, I agree with the master branch should work without the Net 7 because that's still on the preview. So and now it's broken for many people who don't have .NET 7 installed. At least for me, it's broken. So I'm going to fix that. So what I'm going to do is merge master into 2.9.x. I'm going to delete Net 5 and instead create a Net 7. So people who do want to use .NET 7 and then Core 7, etc., they should then use this branch. And yeah, we need to figure out how we can still provide builds and make them available on MyGet. Actually, that shouldn't be too hard. So I'll take a look into that one of these days. But I do want to be releasing the latest fixes soon because some of these issues that were found, they're showstoppers for a few people. Yeah, so my plan is to look into those things tomorrow. So that's what I had to say about 2.9.2. All right. Anything else, guys?
Nope, not for me.
Yep.
Yeah, if you just have 1 or 2 minutes, I just wanted to test if I can present from the iPad. Maybe so that next time I can show the code spaces.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Is the voice better now?
Yeah, much better.
All right. So I'll just test. Maybe it will work. Maybe it doesn't work. I don't know. So do you see my screen?
Yeah, clearly.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So this is the Safari browser. It's visible. So maybe next time then I will demonstrate how to run from code spaces. There are some few tweaks that we need to do it, but finally I was able to make it run. It's not optimal, but if you are doing some code changes on the go, you don't have your machine, it can be of help. So I will present that next time.
That's awesome.
All right. Now I don't know how to stop it.
That's okay. We'll stop it for you.
Okay.
All right, great. Thank you so much, guys, for attending today in the demos, and we'll catch each other next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye.
Bye bye.